This story began with a small commotion in a beautiful old building where many people had gathered. A notary was about to read a will. The notary, an elderly man, began reading the last testament of Riella Anden Coin, a woman known across much of the world for her immense wealth and influence. To everyone's surprise, Duchess Hoson, Valeria herself, had decided to bequeath her entire incredible inheritance, including rare magical stones, to a girl who wasn't even her relative. That girl was Riella Tanar, a young woman from a poor and simple family. Even Riella had no idea why the Duchess had chosen her. Riella had spent her whole life in a small village, poor but full of warmth. She knew and loved every inhabitant, and they loved her in return. Remarkably, the village was known for its delicious, inexpensive fruits and vegetables, as well as high-quality fabric. Riella, who adored flowers, worked tirelessly in her flower shop and, on that particular day, was carrying an armful of blooms. The cheerful grocer, Mr. Carl, was the first to spot the flowers, and then Riella behind them. He greeted her warmly. Friendly and polite as always, Riella gave him a bright smile and returned the greeting. Everyone in the village regarded Riella as a hard-working girl, and she lived up to their expectations, tending to her shop with great dedication. Time flew by when she worked with plants, and she rarely felt tired. The peaceful hum of the flower shop was suddenly broken by the cheerful voice of a red-haired girl named Rena, Riella's close friend. Wanting to give Riella a break, Rena had brought along a feast of juicy, delicious food. At the sight of the dishes, Riella's mouth watered, and she gladly agreed to take a break. As the girls ate, Rena shared the latest gossip. She mentioned having seen their friend Emma at the mansion. Curious, Riella asked how Emma was doing. Rena replied that Emma had said everything was fine, but she hadn't looked it. She appeared worried and tired, despite trying to stay brave. Emma was deeply concerned for the estate's mistress, the elderly Lady Evelyn, who hadn't eaten for 2 days. Even the best doctors had given bleak predictions about her condition. Rena had to cut the conversation short, though, when her break ended and she dashed back to her own store. Left alone, Riella found herself thinking about Lady Evelyn. She had known the old woman, who had done much for the good of the village. Riella prayed for her recovery. But sadly, that very evening, the villagers were called to pay their respects. Lady Evelyn had passed away. Riella could only hope the kind lady had found peace in a better world. She began preparing flowers in remembrance. The next morning, people flocked to her shop to buy flowers for the funeral. At first, Riella charged only a small amount and sold them with a warm smile. One by one, people came. Men in hats, women with children, and each took at least a flower. A young girl even bought a whole bouquet, and after her more people followed suit, eager to show their respect. By noon, Riella had completely sold out, but the demand continued. Thinking quickly, Riella made a bold decision. She temporarily closed her shop and rushed out. When she returned, she brought back a large bouquet of beautiful lilies. This time, however, the price was much higher than before. It wasn't long before someone questioned the cost. A man accused her of trying to profit from the grief of poor villagers. But Riella stood her ground. She explained firmly that the flowers were priced that way for a reason, and she would not lower it. The man examined the flowers, trying to understand what made them so special. But he couldn't see it. And neither could the others. The customers disappeared, and Riella was left alone, knowing that the value of the flowers was invisible to everyone but her. Nearby flower sellers mocked her for the high price, but Riella ignored them. Her sadness lay elsewhere. Since childhood, she had possessed a rare gift. She could distinguish between luminous and non-luminous flowers, and the lilies she had brought back were luminous, filled with a beauty and energy far beyond what the others could perceive. Meanwhile, in a military camp set up in a secluded field, far from civilian life, a letter arrived for the Grand Duke. It was from Duchess Hoson. Along with the letter, she enclosed a mysterious flower, one that glowed softly, as though infused with magic. Back in her flower shop, Riella sat quietly, lost in memory. She remembered a day long ago, walking with her cheerful sister through the forest. That day, their mother had given them a simple task, to collect a few flowers, but not too many. It should have been easy. While her oldest sister eagerly gathered the brightest, most eye-catching blooms, little Riella wandered uncertainly, unsure of what to choose. Then, ahead of her, she saw a faint glow. A tiny, humble flower, barely noticeable among the others, yet it shone with a gentle light. Drawn to it, Riella knelt down to admire its glow and called her sister over excitedly. Her sister, however, was unimpressed. To her, the flower looked plain, even a little odd. She couldn't see the glow Riella was talking about and refused to pick it. Later, the two girls returned home. Riella carrying her glowing flower, and her sister holding a large and showy one. Their mother gratefully accepted both bouquets. But flowers don't last forever. Eventually she had to clear them away, only to discover, with great surprise, that Riella's small flower had not withered at all. It was still fresh and beautiful. From that moment on, she realized her youngest daughter had a unique gift for choosing flowers. But that gift came with its burdens. One day Riella came running home in tears. Alarmed, her mother comforted her and gently asked what was wrong. Sobbing, Riella explained, "Everyone lied to me. They said the flowers weren't glowing." Her mother was puzzled. She hadn't lied, and she didn't understand what her daughter meant. Through her tears, Riella confessed that she truly saw the flowers glow, even though no one else could. Her wise mother gently advised her to keep the glow a secret. "Bring those glowing flowers to me," she said. "I will always see their beauty." Riella had never forgotten that. Her mother had always been someone who comforted and believed in her, and though she was gone, Riella still held on to the hope that one day she would meet someone else who could also see the flower's magical glow. Just then, something extraordinary broke the quiet rhythm of the village. A richly decorated carriage appeared on the dusty road, something never seen in their humble area. Riella heard the rhythmic clatter of hooves, rare in these parts, and turned to look. The magnificent carriage, drawn by a team of horses, sped down the narrow street. She stood frozen, mouth open in awe. To her astonishment, the carriage stopped, right in front of her. Villagers who were still awake gathered quickly, murmuring in disbelief. They all stared at the elaborate crest on the carriage door, instantly recognizing the symbol. It belonged to a gemstone magician, members of a powerful order famous throughout the world. No one could believe their eyes. Then from the carriage stepped an elderly woman with a commanding presence, Duchess Hoson herself. She was not only a noble woman, but also a legendary gem magician, famous for having once defeated the black dragon Nind. Bolaria Andan Coin, admired by both adults and children, had brought peace to many lives. And now she stood before them. Riella's heart pounded. Why would someone of such high status come to a place like this? Why would her carriage stop for a poor village girl? And yet the Duchess didn't glance at anyone else. With a solemn expression, she walked straight toward Riella. Meanwhile, for some reason, Duchess Hoson asked how much Riella's flowers cost. The girl was completely stunned that Hoson had spoken to her at all, and for a moment she didn't understand what was being asked. Then the Duchess, her stern expression softening into a gentle smile, repeated the question, asking again for the price of Riella's flowers. Still in disbelief that someone of such high status was speaking to her so kindly, Riella blushed deeply, unable to find her voice. The crowd around them hissed and muttered impatiently, urging Riella to hand the flowers over for free. "It's the Duchess herself asking," they whispered harshly. Pressured by the townspeople, Riella lowered her head and said humbly that she could not possibly take money from the Duchess. The flowers, she insisted, were just a small gift, nothing more. But the moment Hoson heard those words, heard that Riella was offering her flowers for free and calling them a mere trifle, her expression changed sharply. A shadow passed over her face, and she seemed suddenly angry. She glanced down at the price tag and asked, "Why does such an ordinary flower cost so much?" Echoing the same question that the villagers had asked earlier. Before, Riella had stood by her decision with quiet confidence. But now, faced with the Duchess's sharp gaze, her courage wavered. She knew all too well that anyone who couldn't see the flower's magical glow might think she was simply trying to overcharge grieving villagers. Overwhelmed, Riella closed her eyes in fear, unsure what to say or do. But then, something completely unexpected happened. The Duchess spoke again, this time not with anger, but with a calm authority that carried through the silent crowd. "This price," she said, "is far too low for flowers this beautiful." She turned to her cheerful young assistant and asked if she agreed. The assistant nodded at once, her face lit with genuine admiration. "They are worth far more," she said. A ripple of astonished gasps spread through the crowd. The same people who had scolded Riella only moments ago now stood speechless. None of them had ever imagined that anyone, let alone the Duchess, would suggest paying more for Riella's flowers than for anyone else's. Meanwhile, the Duchess gently took the flowers in her hands, breathed in their scent, and, much to everyone's shock, named a price 10 times higher than what Riella had asked. Riella, stunned, could barely comprehend the enormous value Hoson had just placed on her flowers. "The Duchess will take them all," she announced. Nia, her assistant, immediately handed Riella a check, assuring her it could be verified at any bank. Riella, overwhelmed and confused, stared blankly at the slip of paper. For a moment, it looked as though her very soul had left her body from sheer emotional overload. Seeing this, Nia gave Riella a gentle tap on the head and urged her to count the money. Still in disbelief, Riella unfolded the envelope. The check inside shimmered with a glow she had never seen before, and she had to turn away, momentarily blinded. She had never imagined earning so much money from selling her flowers. As the villagers crowded around to catch a glimpse of the check, the Duchess asked where the flowers had come from. Riella replied, a bit shyly, that she had grown them herself. Hoson raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. Sensing the doubt in her expression, Riella added quickly that she had nurtured them carefully in pots with her own hands. Suddenly, Hosang's demeanour changed. Her calm presence shifted into something sharper as she asked whether Riella always sold her flowers there. Riella nodded. "I cannot stay long," the Duchess said, her tone solemn once again. "I must visit an old friend." She turned to leave. Riella quickly bowed as deeply as she could, while the stunned villagers looked on. Moments later, the Duchess climbed into her richly adorned carriage and left for the mansion of her deceased friend, Evelyn. As soon as she disappeared from sight, all eyes turned to Riella. The villagers began to bombard her with questions about the flowers, the Duchess, and what had just happened. But Riella herself had no answers. Meanwhile, the Duchess's carriage pulled up in front of Evelyn's estate. The servants, already prepared for her arrival, led her inside to the room where Evelyn now rested, serene in a bed of white linens. Hoson approached, took her old friend's cold hand and whispered softly, "You lived a good and noble life." Then, from beneath her cloak, the Duchess drew one of Riella's glowing flowers and placed it gently in Evelyn's hands. The flower pulsed with light, brighter than before. And Hoson smiled. "She would have loved this lily," she said quietly. Glancing at the rest of the flowers nearby, the Duchess shook her head. "One of Riella's blooms is worth more than all the others combined." But she couldn't linger. there was still more to be done. She requested to be taken to Evelyn's legendary Room of Stones. As Hosang, Nia and a servant walked through the long corridor, the Duchess drifted into memory. 40 years ago, she and Evelyn had fought side by side during a brutal war. Evelyn had once told her she noticed things that even Hosang didn't see in herself. They had faced a powerful dragon that had awoken from its slumber. Evelyn had bravely drawn the beast's attention, giving Hosang the time she needed to gather her magic. Together, they had defeated it. Later, bruised and bandaged, Evelyn had sat smiling in her mansion, while Hosang, relatively uninjured, came to visit. Hoson had always been frustrated that the glory was given only to her. But Evelyn had simply said, "That's how I wanted it. Peace matters more than recognition." Now, walking into Evelyn's memory-filled home, Hosang felt the ache of loss more keenly than ever. When they arrived at the Room of Stones, the servant asked the Duchess to inspect their condition. Her son nodded and turned to Nia. "The flowers," she said. Nia hesitated, clearly reluctant. "But they're so rare," she whispered. "Are you sure you want to give them away?" Hoson's eyes narrowed. "Give them to me," she ordered. Flustered, Nia obeyed, handing them over in silence. The Duchess entered the room with reverence. To her surprise, it wasn't as dusty or gloomy as she had imagined. But one central dome stood empty. The gemstone it had once held, destroyed during battle. She remembered how Evelyn had cared deeply for that particular stone. Possel's gaze drifted to the moonstones lining the walls. They still radiated a gentle power. She approached them, praising them softly for protecting Evelyn all these years. With great care, she placed Riella's glowing flowers before them. She summoned her magic, blending it with the power of the flowers, and to her satisfaction, the stones responded. One by one, they flickered with light, then dimmed peacefully. The stones were free at last. Like Evelyn, they had earned their rest. Meanwhile, Riella found herself at the centre of gossip. Everyone around her whispered about her selling flowers to Duchess Hoson. But paying no attention to the murmurs, Riella quietly signed a notice board with an invitation to a memorial for Evelyn, an event she was organising entirely at her own expense. She turned to Rena for her opinion on the inscription. Rena liked the idea, which made Riella smile. However, Rena didn't understand why Riella would spend all the money she had earned from the flowers on this celebration. After all, she had worked hard for it. But Riella only replied that everyone had been kind to her all her life, and she simply wanted to give back. Rena didn't argue. She just asked Riella to bring more treats, since they'd be going on a picnic later. Riella's joy over spending her money meaningfully was short-lived. Soon after, Nia returned, putting on an emotional display. With teary eyes, she pleaded with Riella to accept a new payment, this time 10 times more than before. Holding out the sparkling check, she insisted that Riella make a final decision, refusing to back down. Nia offered several reasons why the girl should accept the money, but Riella hesitated, overwhelmed. She remembered how, a few days earlier, Duchess Hosong's servant had visited her with a request. Grow as many flowers as possible, and grow them entirely by herself. The servant had even taken her hands in his, trying to reassure her. Before they left, Hosong's assistant stepped in and gently pushed the servant aside. They asked if Riella had any questions, but she didn't know what to say. She found the whole situation odd. Why would the Duchess choose her, an unknown florist, instead of one of the famous names in the city? Though bursting with questions, Riella said nothing. She simply agreed to send the flowers at the appointed time and spent the following days consumed with anxiety over the responsibility. Now, as Nia stood before her again, Riella wanted to refuse the new offer. But just then, a neighbour entered her shop. Panic surged in Riella. She didn't want anyone to see the check. It would only fuel the gossip. Noticing the girl's fearful expression, Nia quickly came to her rescue. Smiling slyly, she discreetly cast a spell and handed the altered document to the curious neighbour. To Riella's shock, the man looked at it and declared it was merely an invitation to a tea party hosted by Duchess Hoson. Still confused but visibly relieved, Riella turned to Nia, who flashed her a mischievous smile and stuck out her tongue playfully, a signal that everything was under control. In that moment, Riella realized Nia was a magician. She was filled with awe and a touch of envy. Riella wasn't ready for a tea party, but Nia promised to take care of it and return to the mansion. There, she found Duchess Hoson resting in a flower garden, reading peacefully. Without turning around, the Duchess asked how things had gone. Nia, now dressed differently, bowed and said the delivery was complete and the interference had been dealt with. The Duchess smiled knowingly. The power of the rogue sapphires hasn't been used in a long time. Nia corrected her. Illusion sapphires. I drew their strength from Riella's flower. The Duchess raised an eyebrow in surprise. The sapphires had nearly been depleted, but a single flower had fully restored them. Looking fondly at her assistant, she noted, "There's more than enough greed in you." Unfazed, Nia replied, "Greed is one of the sapphire's core virtues." Then her gaze landed on the letter on the Duchess's desk. "Who's that for?" she asked. "For Archduke Haun," Hoson replied. Nia immediately grimaced. She hated that man and couldn't understand why the Duchess had anything to do with someone like him. Horsek, smiling at the girl's reaction, reminded her gently to choose her words more carefully. Still, Nia grumbled for a while before finally settling down, though she remained visibly upset. Archduke Haun, 25th brother of the king, was the strongest stonemancer of the century. He wielded the onyx of vengeance, a cruel and temperamental gem. His strength was such that he had once single-handedly subdued a dragon before it could emerge from its underground lair. But none of this impressed Nia. She didn't care about Huan's achievements. Then a thought occurred to Hoson, and she smiled to herself. "I feel like playing with Huan." Nia perked up instantly. She had always dreamed of ruining the Archduke's life. The Duchess nodded. "Remember, I promised him my stone chamber." Nia gasped in protest. "You're not allowed to leave this world yet." But Hoson remained calm. At 82, she felt she had lived a good life. Nia, however, began to shout. She insisted the Duchess could live for many more years and manage her affairs just as well. After all, Huan had only taken over the northern front to ease her burdens and had somehow managed to handle both the western and southern fronts too. An unprecedented feat. But the reason for all of Huan's efforts was clear. Duchess Hoson. He wanted her to retire so he could finally take her place. 5 years ago, they had made a pact. In exchange for managing her responsibilities, Hoson would one day bequeath her stones to him. That promise still held. Sighing, the Duchess ended her recollection. She turned to Nia and asked, "When is the dragon fad expected to fall asleep?" 2 months, Nia replied, though she added that Huan's recent victories might have accelerated the timeline. The Duchess considered this. She had every reason to follow through on her promise to the Archduke. But then her gaze landed on the glowing flowers Riella had given her. She said nothing, but a new idea began to form. Without explaining, she declared, "We'll finish for today, let's rest." Meanwhile, on the northern front, the gem majors sat in a circle, resting after another battle. The Stonemancers chatted about the latest gossip, including that the dragon fleet had gone into hibernation, and that Archduke Han was trying to decipher what Duchess Hoson wanted from him, especially since she'd unexpectedly asked in a letter whether he had a girlfriend. Han grumbled to himself. First, the Duchess asked him to take her place on the battlefield, and now she was inquiring about his love life. He reread the letter several times, searching for hidden meaning, but found none. The next morning, Riella rode a carriage to Duchess Hosang's tea party, her heart pounding with nervous excitement. She was beautifully dressed and held a single glowing flower, a rare bloom that only appeared once every few decades. Though small, it was her chosen gift, one she hoped would be meaningful. Buying something with money felt inappropriate. She hoped that her flower, grown with love and care, would suffice. Upon arrival at the mansion, a gallant and impeccably dressed servant greeted her and politely asked her to wait. Riella found herself in an opulent drawing room, filled with an overwhelming spread of sweets and richly decorated shelves. The luxury made her nervous, so much so that she hardly dared to move. She questioned once again why a noble like Duchess Hoson would invite someone like her. Just as she considered leaving to fetch a better gift, a sudden, piercing scream echoed through the hall. Though Riella knew it was impolite to eavesdrop, her curiosity got the better of her, and she leaned toward the door. At that moment, the door burst open. Mrs. Camilla, the source of the shouting, stormed in and accidentally struck Riella, who had been listening at the door. Camilla's face twisted in disgust at the sight of the unfamiliar, plainly dressed girl. Riella, now sitting on the floor and clutching her flower pot, rubbed her aching head. Camilla, full of fury, demanded Riella be removed, along with her dusty pot. But the butler intervened, informing her that Riella was an official guest of the Duchess. Camilla refused to believe it. She leaned in close and demanded Riella identify herself. Calmly, Riella explained that she had received an invitation to the tea party. Camilla scoffed, mocking the very idea that someone so poor would be invited. She called Riella a liar and even accused her of begging from the Duchess. Her scorn turned to the flower. She laughed cruelly at it, calling it a pathetic gift in a cheap pot. Riella remained silent, thinking only how cruel and groundless this stranger's ridicule was. When Camilla began poking her aggressively, Riella asked her to stop. But Camilla only pushed harder. The pot slipped from Riella's hands and shattered, scattering soil and the delicate flower across the floor. Devastated, Riella knelt over the broken pot, desperately trying not to cry. Then, silence fell. Duchess Hoson stood at the threshold, impeccably dressed, her face like thunder. Camilla, who just moments before had been spitting venom, instantly transformed into a sweet and humble lady. She bowed gracefully, introduced herself, and claimed she had come to deliver the Soria stone to the Duchess, and had been waiting all morning. But Hoson said nothing. She stared at Camilla with icy fury. The silence grew thick. Riella, mortified by the broken flower and the mess on the floor, assumed the Duchess was angry at her. She quickly knelt and began cleaning the dirt, hoping to fix her mistake. Her heart ached when she saw the flower, crushed and wilting, but the roots were intact. Perhaps it could be saved. Hosang's cold voice broke the silence. She turned to her assistant, Nia, and demanded to know why a guest had been treated so shamefully and why the flower was broken. Then she ordered Camilla to be punished. Camilla tried to defend herself, but it was too late. Nia charged at her. One blow from the magician assistant sent Camilla flying several meters. Enraged, Camilla retaliated with a spell, demanding Nia move aside. But Nia refused. Her pride had been wounded and she would not back down. Magic clashed violently. A massive explosion rocked the room and dust clouded the air. Riella, nearly engulfed by the blast, shielded herself instinctively. When the dust settled, she realized she'd been protected by a magical barrier. One created by Duchess. Turning to Riella, the Duchess offered a sincere apology for the chaos. She explained that her 2 stonemancer assistants had gotten carried away. Riella was speechless, overwhelmed by how easily the Duchess had protected her, even saving the butler. Meanwhile, Nia was finishing her game with Camilla, who was clearly no match for her in stonemancy. Lifting gracefully into the air, Nia soared over Camilla and effortlessly blocked another of her attacks. Enraged by this display, Camilla shouted curses, her voice shrill with frustration. "To put an end to the commotion," Duchess Hoson spoke sharply, ordering her assistant to finish things quickly. Obediently, Nia gathered her full strength and unleashed a concentrated surge of energy at the arrogant Camilla. The mistress stood no chance. She collapsed, unconscious, and the butler quietly assured everyone that she would be sent home immediately. With the disruption over, Hoson turned to Riella and invited her to sit at the table. She asked gently if the girl had been frightened. Riella tried to insist she was fine, but her trembling hands betrayed her. Watching her, Nia grumbled that she would have ended things with one blow if she'd known Riella would be so scared. Still, Riella put on a brave face and insisted again that everything was okay, which earned her soft smiles from both Nia and Hoson. With a sigh, the Duchess apologized for the chaos and expressed regret over the damage to Riella's gift. But Riella, ever kind, began consoling everyone instead, assuring them that she would bring a sturdier, more thoughtful gift next time. Nia, smiling mysteriously, remarked that she knew Riella would say something like that. Then she stepped aside to reveal something unexpected. The flower, whole and undamaged, back in its pot. Riella gasped in surprise, barely believing her eyes. She quickly realized that this miracle had something to do with the power of the stones. Hoson nodded and explained that Nia had used the rovra, a restoration stone capable of repairing small damages. Lifting a teacup to her lips, the Duchess added that glowing Riella flowers, like the one Riella had brought, could greatly enhance the stone's power, sometimes even beyond the physical space they occupied. Stunned, Riella processed this new information. Then a thought struck her. Did the Duchess also see the glow in the flowers? Hoson confirmed with a slight smile and suggested they move to the garden for a longer conversation. In the fragrant garden, surrounded by lush greenery, Riella spoke openly about how she'd begun to see light in flowers and how she had kept this strange ability to herself. She explained how much she'd hoped the flower she brought would please the Duchess. Hoson listened intently, then spoke solemnly. That kind of flower should not be consumed. Confused, Riella asked what she meant. Instead of answering directly, Hoson asked Riella how much she knew about stone-mancers and their stones. Riella mentioned the famous battle with the dragon Neon, which she had read about in the newspapers, and also spoke of the Archduke's struggles. The Duchess nodded. Riella's knowledge of the basics was solid. She then explained that all stones have different properties and limited energy. Their power is not infinite, and once depleted, a stone can fall into hibernation. To illustrate, Hoson used Nia's illusion stone and conjured a magical display for Riella. A breathtaking vision so realistic that Riella reached out and touched one of the butterflies fluttering nearby. But as the stone's energy was exhausted, the illusion faded, and the stone became dormant. Curious, Riella asked how Nia had used the stone earlier, if it was already asleep. Hoson explained honestly, glowing flowers like the one Riella had brought could awaken even sleeping stones. Originally, such flowers were extremely rare and dim, but now Riella's glowed brighter than any seen before. Realizing the implications, Riella asked if it was possible to awaken all dormant stones using these flowers. But then a shadow crossed her face. What would happen if others learned how to grow them? Would she be imprisoned or forced to grow them forever? To her surprise, Hoson was taken aback. She asked why Riella wasn't trying to profit from such a valuable ability. Riella admitted she was afraid of being locked away and used. Quietly, the Duchess admitted that she was tempted by the flowers, but locking someone away to grow them was far too cruel. She had no intention of doing that. Relieved, Riella exhaled deeply. She wasn't in danger. She could continue her life freely. Finally, Hoson said with a small smile that she'd like to be friends with Riella, but their paths in life were too different. Then, out of nowhere, she asked, "Do you have a boyfriend?" Riella blinked, completely thrown by the question. After everything that had just been said, she didn't even know how to answer. Meanwhile, Archduke Han had just returned to his mansion from the front lines, exhausted and longing for some rest. The battles had taken a toll on him, but so had the endless visits in the capital, where every nobleman seemed to arrive with the same goal, to marry off his daughter to the Archduke. Han, however, had no interest in marriage. He cursed his own prestigious lineage, which had turned him into one of the kingdom's most eligible bachelors, even though he had long since renounced his claim to the throne. Still, the fathers remained relentless. In Han's mind, the political matchmaking felt more draining than the battlefield itself. As he brooded, the door suddenly burst open. His younger brother, grinning ear to ear, had arrived. Having heard rumours that the Archduke was reconsidering the throne, the brother playfully accused him of treason. He dropped into a chair and, still teasing, said that if Han really wanted the throne, he should say so directly. Han grimaced and waved the idea away with disdain, declaring that he wouldn't take the throne even if it were handed to him. His brother was surprised Han had even returned to the mansion, but he welcomed it, since he had business to discuss. The topic soon turned to the dragon Flyard, who had unexpectedly fallen into Slima much earlier than anticipated. Han was intrigued, and his brother looked pleased. It meant they could continue developing the northern region. Just as the prince was about to say more, he stopped mid-sentence. Han, sensing hesitation, impatiently urged him to speak. With some reluctance, his brother asked whether it was time for Han to finally settle in the capital, at least while he still had the freedom to travel. Han instantly understood what he meant. "I'm not getting married," he said flatly. He found it almost absurd that his personal life had become a matter of national concern. His brother explained that their mother had sent him to check in on Han and to see if he had anyone in mind. Han sighed and asked him to stop with the interrogation. He didn't even have a romantic interest, let alone plans for marriage. But as he firmly declared his refusal to wed, Han couldn't help but wonder, what kind of person would it even be to fall in love with? He'd read too many stories of entire nations crumbling under the weight of foolish, blind love. The idea seemed dangerous. Just then, a letter caught his eye on the desk. Picking it up, he realized it was a love letter, clearly not meant for him. He scowled and barked at the assistant, demanding to know if this was what a report was supposed to look like. The assistant, flustered and embarrassed, quickly snatched it back, apologizing profusely and promising not to mix up documents again. Han remained irritated, though more with himself than anyone else. The assistant was clumsy, yes, but unfortunately irreplaceable. Finally, unable to keep it in, Han declared loudly to everyone present that he had no intention of starting any kind of romantic relationship. At the same time, Duchess Hosang's assistant, Nia, had decided to visit Riella, whom she had come to consider a friend. Riella was delighted to see her, even if the visit momentarily pulled her away from work. Nia noticed Riella struggling to move the large notice board and, to her surprise, effortlessly lifted it on her own. "Where do you want it?" she asked cheerfully. Riella blinked, assuming the feat was due to the power of stones. But Nia laughed and said it was all her own strength. Amazed, Riella thanked her and Nia offered to help with anything else she might need. As the two worked together in the flower shop, Nia reminded her that they still had to head to the mansion soon. Once their tasks were complete, the two girls climbed into the carriage and set off for Duchess Hosang's estate. A month had already passed since Riella met Hosang and received permission to come to the garden to care for the plants. It had all begun when the Duchess was once brought a batch of flowers in poor condition. While the servants looked on in dismay, Riella confidently offered to revive them. Unbothered by their state, she enthusiastically asked that the plants be given to her. The Duchess considered the request, and Riella promised to return every flower in good condition. Hosang allowed Riella to take the flowers for their recovery, which made the girl extremely happy. But that wasn't all. The servant soon showed her even more flowers in need of care. At every new delivery, Riella gazed at the wilted plants with greedy determination and begged to take them all. Eventually, Riella found herself standing before a mountain of flowers needing restoration. Though glad she had no idea how to transport them, seeing this, the Duchess proposed a better solution. Riella could simply come to the garden and tend to the flowers there. Josang added that she would be happy to have someone care for the plants, and Riella eagerly agreed, promising to do her best. Then, unexpectedly, Hosang asked Riella for another favour, to help write letters. Riella immediately agreed. The Duchess was pleased. Having someone to handle correspondence would greatly simplify her life. The next morning, Archduke Han returned to his office after a grueling night at work. Without much thought, he tossed his jacket onto the sofa and began sifting through his letters. Among them was one from Duchess Hosang. He always read her letters immediately, though often they left him confused. From the first few lines, he realized this one was stranger than usual. The letter spoke of a beautiful new tree in the Duchess's garden, a pond with lotus flowers in the greenhouse, kittens, and even crows. None of it made sense, and to Han it seemed more like poetic nonsense than an actual message. Even the handwriting was unfamiliar. Still, he was certain it came from the Duchess's estate. Han read on, hoping it was a code. The letter ended with a warm request for him to take care of himself. That gave him pause. Then came the postscript. Hosang's eyesight had deteriorated, so someone else would be writing her letters from now on. Han realized immediately it wasn't Nia. She wouldn't have even tried to write something like this. But apart from Nia, Han didn't know anyone else in the Duchess's mansion who might have written it. That same day, the new letter writer, Riella, visited a kind woman known for baking delicious buns. The cook warmly welcomed her and proudly presented her culinary creations. Riella admired the treats, and when the cook suggested she bring some along for tea with the Duchess, she gladly agreed. When Riella arrived, the Duchess greeted her warmly and again asked for help writing a letter. Riella asked if it should be like before, just writing about anything. And Hosang nodded. After enjoying tea together, Riella set to work. She tried to picture the person receiving the letter. Imagining an older man so immersed in writing, she didn't notice when lunchtime arrived. A maid brought black tea and soft buns, and Riella eagerly took a break. The aroma was so tempting that even the Duchess joined her. The maid described each delicacy in detail, and Riella tasted them with delight, feeling like she was eating the food of the gods. In all seriousness, she turned to the cook and asked her to marry her, prompting laughter from everyone. Then she begged to be adopted instead, just to keep eating the treats. Hosang and Nia chuckled, watching Riella's endless energy. That evening, Archduke Han visited one of his military camps to assess the situation. While discussing matters, he received another letter from Duchess Hosang. His subordinates remarked on how frequently she wrote to him lately. Han quietly took the letter and retreated to his tent, where he made himself comfortable and opened it. This letter described delicious cheese buns recently baked at the Duchess's mansion. Reading about such peaceful domestic life made Han smile. It felt worlds apart from the front lines. That night, he fell asleep early, and his assistant quietly made sure no one disturbed him. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, the Duchess called for her assistant to help her to bed. Naya came immediately. Behind them, two maids whispered about Hosang's worsening health. The next morning brought a flurry of activity in the kitchen. Everyone praised Madame Melda's baking. The same buns Riella had adored. Despite the compliments, Melda remained humble, hoping only that the Duchess would enjoy the food. Many noticed that Hassan had become cheerier thanks to Riella's presence. Yet beneath the surface there was unspoken concern. The Duchess's time was running short. Everyone feared that if she passed without an heir, the mansion would fall prey to the greedy stonemancers. The Duchess, aware of her fading strength, felt protective of Riella and didn't want her entangled in future conflict. One night, Hosang suddenly woke. Nia, who was nearby, noticed right away. The Duchess asked if anything had happened, but all was quiet. Nia shared that Riella was doing well with the flowers and a letter had arrived from Han. Hosang asked for it to be brought and for the lights to be brightened, but Nia hesitated, explaining the lamp was already as bright as ever. The Duchess understood. Her eyesight was nearly gone. She smiled gently, accepting what was to come. Nia began reading the letter aloud, but soon suspected it wasn't written by Han. Still, she read on, adding her own sarcastic commentary. Han had written that he hoped to return to the capital soon and that he wished the Duchess well. Nia pouted at his early return, but Hosang only chuckled. Then the old woman wondered aloud, what if she changed her will? Nia lit up, begging her not to let Han inherit anything, just to see his shocked expression. The Duchess didn't promise anything, but drifted into memories of Han's childhood. She remembered how he used to cry in frustration when he couldn't win their sword fights, vowing to grow stronger. Eventually he disappeared from the mansion, dedicating himself to becoming powerful. The Duchess hadn't seen him for years. She missed him, though she couldn't change who he had become. Only she truly understood the reason behind his tireless effort. Now, lying in bed, the Duchess knew her final lesson for Han would be the most important. She summoned Nia and asked her to call the lawyers. It was time to make a will. She also requested that Riella not be invited to the mansion for a month while the legal affairs were handled. The next morning, Riella waited anxiously at the gate. She hadn't been allowed in the mansion for a month. She remembered the day Nia came and gently told her she could only visit the greenhouse for now. Riella had worried she'd done something wrong, but Nia couldn't explain, though Riella guessed the truth. Her days without the Duchess were quiet and dull. Eventually she learned from another gardener that Hosang had been meeting with lawyers and allowing no one inside. A few weeks later the summons finally came. When Riella entered, she was startled by the Duchess's condition. Hosang greeted her with a weak smile, glad to see her. Her eyesight was nearly gone now. She could only tell Riella was crying by the sound of her voice. The girl wept openly, heartbroken to see the once strong woman so frail. Riella eventually calmed down and apologized to the Duchess for her outburst, explaining that she hadn't meant to cry. In response, Hosang also apologized, realizing how worried the girl must have been during the long silence. With a soft smile, she invited Riella to spend as much time with her as possible. The girl agreed at once. Nia, who had been quietly watching from the side, remained silent but looked visibly saddened. Soon after, Riella was given a room in the mansion, not far from the Duchess's own chambers. Though she worried that her presence might be a burden, her desire to be close to Hosang outweighed her concerns. She decided to stay. While Riella sipped her tea, the Duchess continued her work with the lawyers, avoiding contact with anyone else for the time being. Watching the endless discussions, Riella concluded that lawyers were unbearable and hoped never to deal with them herself. The lawyers, for their part, assured her they had no desire to exhaust the Duchess, but they had little choice. That evening, Hosang invited Riella for another conversation and began sharing stories from her past. Riella listened attentively. When the Duchess struggled to recall where they'd left off last time, she began to guess. Riella playfully pretended to be offended, but quickly reassured her, not wanting to cause worry. Hosang was genuinely surprised by the girl's teasing, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. And her smile, rare and sincere, revealed how much she appreciated it. Encouraged, Riella began to share a story of her own. It wasn't about dragons or magic stones like Hosang's usual tales, but the Duchess enjoyed it all the same. Over time, Riella learned that in her youth, Hosang had been quite headstrong, stubborn to a fault according to her stories. If she wanted to step onto land she didn't own, she'd simply buy it. It shocked newcomers, but her servants were used to it. Through such means, she had greatly expanded her family's inherited lands. Riella found these stories far more interesting than her own. though she never said so aloud. One evening, Riella noticed how late it had gotten and stood to leave. When the Duchess didn't stop her, she smiled and wished the older woman good night, offering to clear the teacups herself. But instead of the usual farewell, Hoson gently told her to rest well. That night, Riella lay in bed, feeling a strange melancholy and anxiety she couldn't explain. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the Duchess, but she tried not to dwell on it. The next morning, Riella overslept. She rushed to get dressed and was still adjusting her clothes when Nia entered, dressed entirely in black. She calmly announced that the Duchess had passed away. Riella froze. The words didn't register. She couldn't speak or process anything else Nia said, lost in a blur of memories. To bring her back to reality, Nia took her hands and told her she was required to be present for the reading of the will. Still overwhelmed, Riella barely understood what was happening. Nia then handed her the Duchess's bracelet, saying it would protect her from most magical threats. But Riella couldn't take in the meaning. She felt like she was suffocating, yet unable to help herself. Nia understood. She didn't press her further. She knew the girl simply needed time. The night before, sensing her end was near, the Duchess had spoken of Riella with deep concern. She also sighed about Han, knowing he would be angry about her will, but she had no plans to change it. Instead, she turned her attention to Nia. Hoson said quietly that having Nia by her side all these years was the best decision she had ever made in her long, turbulent life. Nia, unable to hold back any longer, wept silently. She took her mistress's hand, treasuring the warmth one last time, and cried for the woman who had meant so much to her. Now, the emotional storm had passed, and Nia was composed again, ready for what came next. As she and Riella walked through the hall, Nia gave quiet instructions, aware of how the girl's life was about to change. When they entered the main hall, Nia told Riella to trust the Duchess no matter what happened. But Riella wasn't frightened by her words. What unsettled her was the way the people, seeing her for the first time, began whispering in disapproval. Soon the lawyers arrived, and the atmosphere shifted as everyone turned their attention to them. The notary, who was to read out the Duchess's will, asked for everyone's focus before proceeding. Once he had confirmation, he began reading slowly, following all the proper protocols. As the notary read, Riella's mind wandered. She wondered how much longer she needed to stay, feeling out of place. The elderly man followed the rules meticulously, reading each word carefully, which only seemed to heighten the anticipation in the room. The guests, aware of the Duchess's vast wealth, anxiously waited, hoping to receive even a portion of it. Amid the proceedings, Riella's thoughts kept drifting to the Duchess, and a wave of sadness washed over her. She struggled to hide it, wishing to remain composed. As the notary reached the financial details, Riella could hardly focus her thoughts elsewhere. Just as she was about to leave, Nia gently grabbed her hand, asking her to stay. Reluctantly, Riella returned to her seat, still feeling disconnected. Then the notary announced that the Duchess had bequeathed all her property to one person. A stir rippled through the room. The guests were shocked. None of them had anticipated such an outcome. The whispers started almost immediately, everyone hoping the inheritance would be theirs and not someone else's. The notary tried to quiet the room, but the excitement was palpable. When the noise finally died down, he continued, revealing that the entire inheritance was to go to Riella. Riella froze. A deep fear gripped her. Surely there had been a mistake. As the people around her began to murmur indignantly, some questioning how someone like her could be the sole beneficiary, Riella's heart raced. One man even started a rumor, claiming that the stones were meant for Archduke Haun, not Riella. In the chaos, Riella remained silent, hidden in her own fear, grateful that no one seemed to notice her too closely. But then, one of the men recognized the bracelet Riella was wearing. The same arm-felt pearls that had belonged to the Duchess. He called out, and everyone turned to look. The loudest of the voices from earlier immediately demanded to know where Riella had gotten the bracelet. It became clear that she was indeed the one who had inherited everything. People started whispering and eyeing her suspiciously. Nia quickly came to Riella's side, hugging her and urging her to ignore the crowd. With a sharp glare, Nia silenced the room, and everyone instinctively stepped back, unnerved by her intensity. One man huffed in displeasure, but soon turned away. Meanwhile, in the mansion of Archduke Haun, the servants were in turmoil. They had been searching for their master, worried about his well-being. Haun's youngest assistant was nearly in tears, asking if the master was truly alive. Others, accustomed to his long absences, grumbled at the fuss. Just as they were about to spiral into panic, the door opened, and Archduke Han entered, unbothered. He explained that he had left a note, but the servants were still concerned, especially since he had been in the dragon's lair, a place known for being dangerous. Seated at the table, Han was handed a pile of letters, and upon reading one, he learned that the Duchess had passed away 4 days earlier. He was shocked, especially since he had expected to see her again. The letters also revealed that all of her property was to be inherited by a girl named Riella, a name he hadn't heard before. Intrigued, he decided to find out who she was and why everything had gone to her. The next morning, Nia knocked on Riella's door. When she received no response, she entered. Riella had a busy day ahead, and Nia had hoped to wake her early. As she approached the bed, she heard Riella whispering the Duchess's name in her sleep, tears slipping down her face. Nia, feeling a pang of sadness herself, hesitated for a moment, missing the Duchess too. But there was no time to mourn. Nia quickly woke Riella, noticing her swollen eyes from crying. After comforting her, Nia hurriedly prepared Riella for the day, sending her to breakfast before emotions could overwhelm her again. The hearty meal helped revitalize Riella, and she felt a little better, ready to face the challenges ahead. At the breakfast table, a pile of papers was placed before Riella, detailing her newfound inheritance. The lawyers explained that it would be impossible to go through everything at once, so they recommended reading it gradually. Meanwhile, Nia and the butlers had managed to deal with the disgruntled guests, sending them away after the will was read. But for Riella, the real challenge had just begun. The inheritance wasn't just limited to the mansion. It included wheat fields, farms with livestock, and the vast surrounding territory. There were also jewels, money, and magical stones. The sheer scale of it all was overwhelming, and the lawyer grew exhausted just reading through it. Riella, feeling the weight of the responsibility, hesitantly raised her hand. "Is it possible to refuse all of this?" The lawyers, visibly disheartened by her question, explained that while it was possible, refusing the inheritance would have serious consequences. It would go to the state, and many people would lose their livelihoods. Moreover, the annual event that the Duchess had financed would be cancelled, affecting countless people. Riella, now deeply worried, didn't want to cause such devastation. She had no idea what to do next. Meanwhile, the man continued to read out a list of damages that would occur if Riella refused the inheritance. The girl was terrified by the immense consequences her refusal would have in various areas. Overcome with dread, Riella sank in her chair, prompting the lawyer to pause and attempt to console her, urging her to sign the will so she could officially inherit. Realizing there was no other choice, Riella, through her tears, reluctantly signed the paper. After the lawyers left, Riella fell into despair, not wanting to sign anything. However, she resolved to manage the Duchess's affairs to the best of her ability. Still, she was deeply concerned about how to explain everything to her family. Suddenly, she remembered that the inheritance should have gone to Archduke Haun, not her. Haun was a renowned stonemancer, and his ruthless reputation often made headlines. Riella feared that Han might try to kill her out of jealousy, since she had received everything, even though he was the rightful heir to the stones. Despite her trepidation, she wasn't ready to lose her life. Luckily, Nia noticed Riella's distress and invited her to the greenhouse for a change of scenery. Riella, feeling awkward as she typically only entered the garden with permission, hesitated before stepping inside. She was startled to see that the flower, a gift from the Duchess, was glowing. The flower's blooming cycle spanned 2 centuries, and its sudden bloom caught Riella off guard. She felt an overwhelming sadness, knowing the Duchess would never see the flower in bloom. With tears welling in her eyes, Riella sat alone in the greenhouse, hoping that crying would provide some relief. Just then, she heard someone enter, and hastily declared that she wasn't crying. To her surprise, it wasn't Nia, but an unfamiliar man standing before her, silently observing her. They both froze, unsure of what to say. Embarrassed, Riella quickly wiped her tears, trying to hide them from the stranger. She remembered Nia's warning that no one was allowed on the estate without permission. Despite this, the man confidently asked who she was, speaking to her as if he were the owner of the manor. The man, having just returned from the front, had gone straight to his brother and reported the end of his affairs. Archduke Han was about to leave when his brother stopped him, insisting that this wasn't part of his plan. The ruler ordered Han to return, as they needed to discuss matters concerning Duchess Hosang's inheritance. Han's brother suggested that Han should visit the Duchess's mansion, as it was possible for the king's representative to inspect the will without the heir's consent. Han, feeling satisfied with the official permission, headed toward the mansion, burning with anger over the will. He believed that Riella had deceived the ailing Duchess and somehow managed to inherit everything. However, Han couldn't understand why the Duchess's servants had been so naive. Suddenly, Han heard crying, and his suspicion grew. He frowned, thinking he couldn't believe it was Riella. But when he saw a girl sitting on the ground, her face covered in tears, he was momentarily taken aback by her appearance. Despite his discomfort, he couldn't shake the strong feeling that struck him, though he couldn't yet comprehend what it was. Han asked who the girl was, but Riella, still embarrassed, noticed the arrogance in his tone. Although it was their first encounter, she felt no fear, as she now had a right to stand her ground among the aristocracy. Before she could respond, Nia rushed into the greenhouse and shouted for Riella to move away from the stranger. Riella, surprised by his actions, asked how he could see the glow of the flower. Confused by her question, Han turned toward her, and Nia, filled with hatred for Han, confronted him. Sparks flew between them, but Riella suddenly recalled that both Nia and Han could see the flower's light. Excited, she asked the stranger his name. He introduced himself with a hint of annoyance. "I am Archduke Han Arrol Pendragon." Riella, terrified, broke into a cold sweat, recalling the ruthless rumors about him. Nia, furious at Han's proximity to Riella, made a move to strike him. Before she could, Han quickly grabbed Riella's hand, pulling her close to shield her from the potential attack. Riella, stunned by the sudden embrace, blushed but struggled to free herself. Despite her attempts to escape, Han held on tightly, worried that Nia's magic might harm her. Nia, seeing what was happening, considered attacking Han, but Han coolly stated that he would deal with her first and then talk to Riella. This declaration shocked Riella, and she feared for Nia's safety. As Han prepared to cast a spell, Riella, desperate to stop him, pushed him with all her might. But Han, unshaken, remained focused on his magic. In a split second, Riella grabbed the only thing Han cared about, the glowing flower, and threw it at him. The pot shattered, and Han lost his concentration, causing his spell to dissipate. Riella rushed to Nia's side, checking if she was okay. Nia, trying to reassure her, stopped mid-sentence when she saw Riella's face. A small but noticeable scratch marred the girl's skin, making Nia panic and call out her name in alarm. Meanwhile, Han, stunned by the events, realized that Riella had inherited everything from the late Duchess. Both girls were shaken, but Han struggled to believe that Riella, of all people, was the one to receive such an inheritance. Meanwhile, the girl touched the wound on her face with her fingers and looked at her hand, noticing the blood. Han wanted to apologize and explain everything, but Riella screamed at him to stay away. Stubbornly and with great resolve, she declared that he should never come near Nia, even though she herself was bleeding. Riella then turned to her assistant, inspecting her closely for any injuries. Thankfully, Nia was unharmed. Han, seething with fury, was well aware that Nia wasn't just an ordinary assistant, but a dragon in disguise. At that moment, the voices of servants were heard outside the door. Hugging her assistant, Riella cried out loudly for help. The Archduke was shocked by Riella's behavior, as she stood still and did absolutely nothing while screaming for assistance. The servants rushed into the greenhouse, fully prepared for a confrontation. Upon seeing their mistress and assistant kneeling before Han, they were puzzled. Nia immediately sprang into action, declaring that the Archduke had attacked them. This accusation alarmed the servants, who were concerned for their new mistress's safety. Riella, trying to calm the situation, reassured them that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. However, when the servants noticed the blood on her face, they became enraged and turned toward Han, demanding an explanation. To Han's surprise, the man who had fought dragons without fear began to retreat under the pressure of an ordinary assistant. Meanwhile, Neo quickly took Riella into a room to heal her wound using the magic of stones. As they closed the greenhouse door behind them, Neo turned back to Han and stuck her tongue out at him, mocking his predicament. Later, Han found himself sitting in front of Riella's lawyers, forced to listen to their reprimands. They informed him that his actions had almost resulted in a serious offence by overstepping his authority as an inspector, which was unacceptable. Han only half listened, his mind preoccupied with Riella's condition. In the middle of the lawyer's next sentence, Han snapped out of his thoughts and asked what they were discussing. The lawyers, with a sigh, explained that Riella wasn't seriously hurt. Han breathed a sigh of relief, but the lawyers were frustrated, believing that he should have apologized properly. Despite their reproaches, Han remained composed and asked to speak with Riella personally, stating that he had come as an inspector. Meanwhile, Riella was seething with anger at Han for harming Nia. Though Nia remained calm, secretly pleased by the situation, she carefully treated Riella's wound. However, Riella was determined not to calm down and insisted on demanding an apology from the Archduke. Nia advised against it, especially for her own sake, as she and Han were in a deep conflict. Remembering something from the past, Nia's mood shifted and she grew quiet. The girl, overwhelmed by emotions, asked Riella for permission to leave the room and ran off. Riella, observing this, realized that Nia's reaction was likely due to Han's presence. Though she had promised herself to speak with Han for the sake of a peaceful future for Nia, she couldn't shake her fear of him. Meanwhile, Nia, having mastered her emotions, made her way to the Archduke's temporary chambers. Though she had no desire to speak with him, this was the final wish of Duchess Hoson. With politeness, Nia knocked on the door before entering the room. Han, standing with his back to her, turned around, and to her surprise he wore an apologetic expression. This only served to irritate Nia even more, as she realized she couldn't leave just yet. Seeing his assistant standing before him, Han's expression shifted to one of anger. Realizing an opportunity, the Archduke prepared to use his stones, but Nia, quick on her feet, found a way to defend herself. For now, Han was forced to refrain from taking drastic action. He clicked his tongue in frustration, calmed the stones, and turned away, asking why Nia had come. Nia, remaining calm, responded without being provoked. She tossed a moonstone to Han, revealing it to be the shadow crystal, which was the only inheritance he had received from Duchess Hoson. Han found it odd that the Duchess had not left any paperwork, but instead had handed him the stone. Curiosity piqued, he quickly realized there must be something more to it, and shook the shadow crystal to activate it. To his surprise, the image of Duchess Hoson began to materialize in front of him. When Han saw her, he was stunned by how much she had aged, remembering her as much younger. Meanwhile, the image of the Duchess created by the crystal began to speak, and Han listened intently. The Duchess expressed her joy at how upset Han seemed over the will, which only fueled his anger. The Archduke began to show his indignation, but the image of Hoson explained that she simply wanted to see him angry. This only made Han more furious as he looked at the taunting message from the already deceased Duchess. After a brief laugh, the image of the Duchess became more serious and moved on to discuss the will. Hosang explained that it was foolish for the Archduke to hope she would willingly bequeath everything to him. Instead, he should have forced her to make a decision in his favour before she met Riella. Without hesitation, the Duchess revealed that Riella had the ability to grow glowing flowers, a fact that astonished Han. However, Nia left the image to explain the rest, as the crystal's duration was running out and they needed to hurry. Hosang continued, recalling how she had devoted her entire life to working with stones, something she had no regrets about. However, when she met Riella, the Duchess fell in love with the child and realized she could pass on much of her own knowledge. That day, Hosang decided that Riella would be the last gem in her collection. The only way to protect her was to leave her all her inheritance. Han anxiously wondered what would happen if Riella met a malicious stonemancer instead of the Duchess. The Duchess then posed a question that confused Han. Why was she even telling him all of this? She explained that by looking at Nia, she realized neither the assistant nor Han himself could harm Riella. Hosang added that Nia and Han shared one thing in common, which shocked both of them. In unison, the Archduke and the girl expressed their indignation at such a statement, causing the image of the Duchess to smile. Finally, the Duchess told Han to protect the new mistress, adding that it wasn't a request, but something beneficial for him, as his reward would be all of Hosang's stones from her collection. Hearing about the moonstones, Han was surprised, as he had always thought he would never have access to them. The image of the Duchess explained that another page of the will existed, transferring all her stones to the Archduke. This page was in a protected room of stones, guarded by the moonstones themselves. The Duchess warned that the will would self-destruct in 6 months, which was not ideal for Han. The Archduke, worried about how he would obtain the stones, was left deep in thought when the Duchess's image faded away. Nia, eager to leave Han's room, quickly exited, but Riella suddenly appeared before him. She wanted to discuss what had recently happened, but Han, still emotional, wasn't listening. He stood motionless, murmuring to himself. Riella asked what he was doing, but Han, without answering, sharply turned and pressed her against the wall. He declared that he would receive all of Hosang's inheritance, including Riella. After speaking those words, Han wondered why he had said such things out loud. Before he could say anything else, Riella silently turned and walked toward the door, saying nothing. When she reached the door, she opened it, smiling angrily, and politely told Han to leave. Left with no choice, the Archduke complied and left the room. Riella then went to study with Nia, exhausted but determined to learn. During her free moment, she thought back to Han's words, which she considered selfish. However, she couldn't understand why he had restored the flower she threw at him earlier. At first he defended her, then later behaved aggressively, leaving Riella unsure of what to make of him. Suddenly, a maid burst into Riella's room, breathless, only able to say Han's name. Meanwhile, the Archduke was in his mansion, unaware of what was being said about him in Riella's mansion. He recalled the expression on her face when she had said goodbye to him, and unease crept in, though he couldn't understand the reason for his emotions. His thoughts were interrupted when the Queen decided to visit him. Han immediately greeted her politely, kneeling, and she invited him to sit. The Queen, sensing something was troubling the Archduke, asked what was bothering him. Han became embarrassed, not wanting his feelings to be so obvious. The Queen didn't offer immediate advice, but instead took a moment to sip her tea and think. After analysing the situation, the Queen suggested that Han marry Riella. Han was caught off guard and nearly choked at the idea. He didn't understand why he would marry the new mistress of the Hosang mansion. The Queen explained that the girl was beautiful and now had an excellent inheritance, specifically the stones. Ensuring that they remained with Riella was a prudent move. Though Han admitted that the Queen's words made sense, he still resisted the idea of marriage. After some thought, Han realized that the Queen was concerned enough about him that he needed to do something. His mind wandered to a public ball a few years ago when he refused to let anyone get close to him. An assistant had tried to show him some attractive girls, but he hadn't cared. Then, a girl named Steron approached him. She introduced herself as a recent graduate of the Stonemancer exam and was clearly nervous, bowing in front of him. Steron, still embarrassed, asked Han for advice on moonstones. Han sighed but allowed her to speak, causing Steron to beam with happiness. As they spoke, Steron's father watched from the sidelines, pleased by the interaction. A little later, the old man got drunk and began boasting to others that the Archduke and his daughter were getting along well, and their marriage was just around the corner. He was happy even if Han renounced the throne, as it wouldn't affect his grandchildren. Han later heard about these rumours from his faithful assistant, who had grown tired while handling the situation. Han thanked the assistant and from that point on avoided any more balls, preferring to act alone to prevent further misunderstandings.